In the 1800s, legal discrimination towards Asians was prevalent and growing in the United States. Americans believed that Asians were the cause of declining wages and economic problems, but at the time, they only made up 0.002% of the population. Many laws targeted Asians specifically. One of these discriminatory laws included the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which prohibited Chinese immigration to the USA for 10 years. Laws like these made it extremely difficult for Chinese to migrate and live in America. These struggles included segregated towns, marriage restrictions based on race, and school segregation. But in 1885, one case would stand against this discrimination against Asians in schools in California, the first case to combat segregation against Asians in schools. This was Tate v. Hurley.
On March 6, 1885, in San Francisco, California, Mary Tate sued the San Francisco Board of Education and Principal Hurley of Spring Valley Primary School for not allowing her child to attend a segregated school. Tate v. Hurley crossed a frontier in history by becoming the first Asian American case to challenge school segregation. It allowed for segregated Asian schools to be built to allow Asians to be educated in California, and inspired many Asian Americans to fight against segregation in the United States.
In the 1880s, the Tapes were a wealthy Asian family in San Francisco, California. Mary Tate immigrated to America at the age of 11 in 1868. Joseph Tate, who would later become Mary's husband, came to America in 1864. They married in the early 1870s and became wealthy by helping other Chinese immigrants come to America, then allowing them to work for the drayage company the Tapes worked for. In San Francisco, before the case, schools were segregated. Only whites could attend. When the Tapes tried to enroll their daughter into Spring Valley Primary School, they were denied because they were Asian. They were supposed to be allowed to attend public schools, since there were no laws in California against it. But in San Francisco, there were no schools they were allowed into and no ways for Asians to get education. So when they were turned away because of the Board of Education's rules, they filed the first Asian American lawsuit to challenge Asian school segregation. Tate v. Hurley.
The Tapes sued Principal Jenny Hurley of Spring Valley Primary School for not allowing her daughter, Mamie, into the school. The school argued Mamie had filthy and vicious habits, suffering from contagious or infectious diseases, even though her health bill later turned out to be clear. Afterwards, the school openly stated that denying Chinese children from attending school was unconstitutional but necessary. Eventually, in March 1885, under California law that all children were entitled to receive education in public schools, the court ruled that children of Chinese and Mongolian descent would receive education in separate schools. It still meant, however, that Mamie Tate was still denied admission into Spring Valley Primary School. When enrolling her into the school, she was still denied, this time the reason being that she had no certificate of vaccination and that the class capacity was full. This was mentioned in the newspapers at the time, such as the Sacramento Daily Record Union.
During the case, Mary Tate had written a letter to the Board of Education. It talked about how Mamie was like any other American child, so she should be allowed into public schools. In her letter, she said, "Dear sirs, will you please to tell me, is it a disgrace to be born a Chinese? Didn't God make us all? What right have you to bar my children out of the schools because she is a Chinese descent?" She talked about how her child dresses like the other children and plays with only them, and that even though she was good enough to play with them, she isn't allowed into the same school as them. In the final sentences, she says, "It seems no matter how a Chinese may live and dress, so long as you know that they are Chinese, then they are hated as one. There is not any right or justice for them."
The decision of Tate v. Hurley made the San Francisco Board of Education build Asian segregated schools for Asians to receive an education. According to the article, Chinese in America, A Silent Journey and Invisible Existence, When ordered by the California Supreme Court to admit Chinese into public schools, San Francisco School Board lobbied for a separate educational system for Chinese children in order to avoid having Chinese and whites in the same school. The bill was passed swiftly, and the Oriental Public School was established in 1885 as the first separate elementary school in America for Chinese. Finally, at least Chinese children have a public school to attend. This signified the beginning of access to American education by Chinese children. Because Chinese could get an education, then it would give Chinese kids the ability to learn English, get an education, and move up beyond manual labor and minimum wage jobs. This is why this is an immediate impact on this case.
Asians fought in many cases for their rights. Tate v. Hurley served as an inspiration to other Asians battling for their civil rights. An example of this is the 1998 case Ho by Ho v. San Francisco Unified School District. In this lawsuit, 2 Asian students were denied admission into public schools of their choice due to ethnic-based enrollment limitations. In this case, the Hos mentioned Tate v. Hurley as evidence that the Hos should not be judged by their race and should be allowed into school. Tate v. Hurley inspired other cases to combat school discrimination.
Tate v. Hurley also impacted and inspired the well-known case Brown v. Board of Education. In the document, Excluded, Segregated, and Forgotten, a historical view of the discrimination of Chinese Americans in public schools, it says, "Yet, in 1971, Justice William Douglas revealed that Brown v. Board of Education was not written for blacks alone. Instead, the court explained that the segregation of Chinese Americans from the California public school system was the classic case of de jure segregation involved in Brown v. Board of Education." This shows that Tate v. Hurley was crucial for Brown v. Board of Education to happen, and proves that Tate v. Hurley's legacy was important for the eventual end of segregation.
Even today, Asians are still fighting for equality in education. Affirmative action is where colleges and universities will favor applications by certain races than others, which means other races are favored over Asians. Asians are fighting to end affirmative action because it isn't fair for other races to be favored over Asians. An example of this is the amicus brief of the case Students for Fair Admissions v. President and Fellows of Harvard College. This amicus brief was made by the Asian American Legal Foundation. In this case, the Students for Fair Admissions was fighting for Asians not to be discriminated against with affirmative action. The amicus brief mentioned that Harvard and the UNC let students in not just based on race and academics, it is also based on a personal rating. But it was found that Asians tended to score lower on the personal rating than other races. This seemed to be a way for Harvard and the UNC to indirectly exclude Asians. These events show that Asians are still being discriminated against today. The amicus brief had mentioned Tate v. Hurley, which proves Tate v. Hurley is helping the fight for Asian equality in schools.
Mary Tate sued the San Francisco Board of Education and Principal Hurley of Spring Valley Primary School because they didn't allow her child to attend a segregated school. Tate v. Hurley crossed a frontier in history by becoming the first Asian American case to challenge school segregation. The case allowed for segregated Asian schools to be built. This is important to history because they inspired Asian Americans to fight back against school segregation. Even today, with affirmative action being impacted, Asians are fighting for equality in schools.